welcome back to Spiritwind. Spiritwind is a study group for spiritual adventurers, and we would like to invite you on our adventure. Every Wednesday at 5:30, our study group meets at Unity of Auburn, 1212 High Street, and we discuss different topics every month. And this is what this program is all about, is to introduce you to the topics that we'll be studying. So please enjoy the ride that we have for you today. I am Pam Hart, and with me is Rick Wright. He is our guru and teacher. And what are we going to talk about, Rick?
Well, first we're going to just kind of do a review of what we did last month. And that is, last month we looked at the Gnostic Gospels.
Okay.
And more, because not all that we looked at were Gnostic Gospels, but they were all part of what was called the Nag Hammadi Library that was discovered in 1945 in Egypt. They were writings by all different groups of Christian, various Christian groups at that time.
Now, were these from the apostles themselves or just the groups?
Well, this is the thing that's strange. See, people think that that when Christianity grew, it left Israel, and we know it went up to Turkey, where Paul writes letters to the Ephesians and Philippians and all these groups that are in that area, and eventually to Rome. But the thing is, before the apostles got to Rome, there was already Christian groups there. Before Paul got there was already Christian groups. When Paul wrote in Turkey to Philippi and these other places, Ephesus and so forth, there were already Christian groups there. He was writing to Christian groups that were already there.
Oh.
And so there were all these different Christian groups, and different of them had different ideas, and those different groups kind of got snuffed out around the time of Constantine in the 300s, the 4th century, and as well their works were destroyed systematically at the order of Constantine, so that only one Christian group would be left. And that happened to be the Christian group that his mother belonged to. And
known as the Catholics.
Yes,
today.
And they became the Catholic Church. So anyway, in the class we looked at some of the other writings that we didn't know about until, many of our lifetimes and so forth. We looked at the Gospel of the Nazarenes, the Gospel of the Ebionites, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Truth.
Would you like to read any passages or tell us about some of these?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there were two fairly Jewish, they were Jewish Christians. I would say they were like Jews for Jesus today, because we have a whole movement today which is Jews for Jesus. But the difference is the Jews for Jesus today basically believe what Christians have always believed since the Catholic Church became the first major church, and these groups didn't believe, the groups back then, the Jewish Christians in those days, didn't believe a lot of what people that call themselves Jews for Jesus do today. And I'll show you how.
So they didn't believe that Christ was holy and came from a virgin birth and different things like that. But they did recognize him as a Messiah and a great teacher.
That's exactly right. But, today, Jews for Jesus would think those Jews back then were wrong.
Oh.
You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The main thing we know about a group called the Nazarenes is they had their own version of Matthew. And when I say their own version, that's what I mean. It's not Matthew, it's their version of Matthew. There's differences. But the main difference is it was translated into Aramaic. And that was the language of the people in Jesus' time. So it was really written to other Jews in Jesus' time.
Okay.
And slowly, in later times, the Christians couldn't read Aramaic anymore, and so that kind of put an end to them. At least with their message going anywhere. The ones that kind of picked up the ball and ran with it were called the Ebionites, and Ebionites comes from the Hebrew word Ebionim, which means the poor ones. And they were a Jewish Christian sect, but they believed that Jesus of Nazareth was a mere man who, by virtue of his righteousness in following the law of Moses, was chosen by God to be the Messiah. And like you said, the Ebionites rejected as heresies things like the divinity of Christ, the virgin birth, substitutionary atonement, and so forth. And they saw him as the Messiah, and what they had hoped he would do would be to put an end to the animal sacrifices, and that when he died as a martyr, he would move Israel to repentance, which didn't happen, but that was what they believed.
And so it seems that the Ebionites were really just an offshoot of the regular Jewish
Right.
religion. Were they in different countries, or were they just mostly situated
They were
in Israel?
mainly in Israel, and that's probably why they came to an end. I think my own view is, and I could be wrong, but my view is that the Ebionites probably didn't end because of Constantine, like the Gnostics. The Ebionites ended because in 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed and the Jews were scattered. Well, the next gospel we talked about was the Gospel of Thomas, and it's, of all the other gospels, it's the closest to the time of the four gospels, and it's made up of 114 secret sayings.
And these are secret because we haven't heard them before,
Yeah.
or do they call them secret sayings in the book?
It's because the Gnostics believed that one was not saved because Jesus died on the cross, because they rejected the idea that Jesus had a body and was physical.
But did they believe in original sin?
Well, not necessarily. They saw that the whole world of matter, the whole earth, everything was just sin.
Oh.
It was all
Okay.
bad stuff. And so they had to rise above it, and how they were able to rise above it was by obtaining this secret knowledge. Secret knowledge. And so the statements in Thomas are supposed to be giving us some of this secret knowledge.
Okay.
And this is what I think is just horrendous. A horrendous bit of secret knowledge.
Okay.
And it says this. He says, it says, Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." And Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she may become a living spirit too."
So that's secret knowledge, huh?
Yeah. And well, it even ends, "For every woman who makes herself male that enter the kingdom of heaven.
So basically, that's just Thomas's thoughts.
Yeah, I would say they were just Thomas's view. He might have thought he got them from God. I don't believe so. I think God created men and women to be equal, not one to be inferior to the other. But for him, that was secret knowledge.
Okay.
But I think I said this in another program, but the difference is not all Gnostics felt that way.
Mm.
There were different kinds of Gnostics, and the other Gnostics had women as priests
Mm-hmm.
and administering the sacraments. So
Mm-hmm.
not all Gnostics felt like Thomas.
And I think you mentioned before that one of the reasons that a lot of these Gnostic Gospels weren't included in the Bible was that the church at that time felt that these weren't divinely inspired,
Right.
and so they didn't think they were a good representation to be included in the Bible.
And you ask the question, and what would prove to them they're inspired?
Good question.
If it agreed with their own thinking.
Okay. So
The Catholics thought their writings were inspired because they agreed with them. They thought the Gnostics were not inspired because they didn't agree with them. And really, that's how it is in every denomination today. The 45,000 Protestant denominations is that every group thinks it's right and the other ones are wrong.
and usually based on very small passages
Yeah.
of the Bible
Just
that they
isolating a passage here or
and then
there.
developing a religion around it,
Yeah.
type of thing.
The Gospel of Mary is about Mary Magdalene, and she's given very high status among the apostles. In fact, at the end of the text, the apostle Levi acknowledges to his fellow apostles Mary's that Jesus loved her more than us. And Mary's special relationship shows that Jesus revealed to her alone a vision that the explanation of the nature of things that are hidden from the apostles.
So did Mary go out and preach and have a following and teach some of these things?
That's what's suggested, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, while Jesus was alive, she certainly went with him. We have text where it says she followed him and ministered with her means, meaning financially supported his work.
Oh yeah. So she
And then she was at the cross when Jesus was crucified with his mother, and then she was the first one to see him when he was resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
That's the last time we hear about her in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the last time we hear from her.
Right.
In these books. They
Right.
keep talking.
Right. Right.
And so in the Gospel of Philip, he says, there are three who walked with the Lord. Mary, his mother, and her sister, and Magdalene, whom they said was his lover. Mary is his sister and his mother and his lover, it says. There you have it. She was everything. I think it's basically saying she was everything to him. She was like his sister, she was like his mother, and she was like his lover.
So contrary to what the Catholic Church likes to portray Mary as, from what I understand, Mary was a woman of means.
Yes.
Because she was able to support Jesus in his wanderings and helping to feed other people too.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was a very important part of his life.
Very important. And I don't think she would have just dropped off the the watch list all of a sudden just because Jesus died.
Right.
And the other groups certainly don't think she did. The last thing we looked at, gospel we looked at, was called the Gospel of Truth. And it's not a gospel in the traditional sense of being a story about Jesus. Rather, it's a gospel in the sense that the word gospel itself means good news. And so it's the good news of God's gracious revelation of saving knowledge or gnosis, which comes through Jesus Christ. And just for a time period, they believe that the Gospel of Truth was written about 180. Yeah.
Any final words on these Gnostic Gospels that we looked at?
I would just like to emphasize the gift that we have been given in these Gospels, because it shows of the richness of expression of the different followers of Christ. And we need to read some of these to have a better idea of who Jesus was to different groups, just as with our different denominations today.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding always helps.
Right.
It helps people to be tolerant, understanding, and
Right. Right. Well, I think it's a very interesting subject, and I'm glad that we covered that in the month of February. So let's figure out what's going on for the month of March now.
Well, March is going to be an interesting one. It's I'm doing a class for the month of March. It's called UFOs, A Different Perspective.
Oh my goodness.
Or different perspectives, I should say, plural.
Yeah.
Different perspectives.
So, can you share with us a little bit?
Yeah, I'll show you some of what we're going to be looking
Okay.
at. It's pretty interesting, I think. I had been curious about UFOs since I was a kid. I grew up seeing The Blob and Mission from Mars, Star Trek, Lost in Space, Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars. But it wasn't until my first year in college that I became especially curious because the release of Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. Mm-hmm. And since I was studying to be a minister, Gods, Chariots of the Gods, sounded like something I should read. Mm-hmm. And he suggested, what Daniken suggested, it's called the ancient astronaut theory. He didn't really look too much at like UFOs today, like you might see in modern documentaries on UFOs today. He was focused on what he called ancient astronauts, and he had a theory that our planet has been visited at different times by alien races that have modified how we have done things. And he starts out by showing all kinds of archaeological discoveries, things like the Nazca Lines, Machu Picchu, the way it's put together, stones that are just perfectly shaped, that weigh tons, and they're so perfectly, you can't stick a paper between them. And there's no mortar, there's no nothing. The pyramids, Easter Island, all of those things he cites as evidence. So we'll get into that in depth. Another thing was also, shortly after that, I was working with a television evangelist by the name of George Vandeman. And he wrote a book that was called Psychic Roulette. And Vandeman wrote, and he believed, that, quote, the crowning act of deception of Satan would be to attempt to impersonate the second coming of Christ. Mm-hmm. And how he would do it would have UFOs come. It says that when Christ returns, he'll come in the clouds. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't fly in a cloud. just fall through it. So he says, they'll come in these UFOs. That's what's going to happen. It's going to trick people. They'll think, oh, this is what it was supposed to, this is what it was about all along. Anyway, so we're going to look at that. Then I worked as a seminary student, as a research assistant for he was a historian, a theologian, and an anthropologist who studied at Cambridge and the University of Utrecht, Godfrey Oosterwal. And he was doing research on what were called cargo cults. And what cargo cults were was a phenomena that happened after World War II, where they found on a lot of these islands in the Pacific where freight planes had flown to give supplies to the soldiers and ships and that, and dropped things on different islands.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy, where someone throws a Coke bottle out of an airplane, and the primitive people below think it came from the gods.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these people, when they got this stuff, they think that they see this plane,
Mm-hmm.
and to them, they would say something like, a great bird that roared like a lion flew across the sky and dropped this to us. They were gods, And some of these cargo cults have made, they would make landing strips to woo them into coming back. They wanted them to come back. Well, that even showed that not only showed these things, they showed that these things suggested that we're moving towards the end, whatever that is. And so it was interesting when I was doing research for this gentleman, Oosterwal, I found that in the Hindu religion, they're waiting for the avatar of Kalkin, which is the last avatar to come.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buddhists are waiting for the Buddha Maitreya, who's the last Buddha. The Jews are still waiting for the Messiah. The Christians are waiting for the second coming of Christ. And the Muslims are waiting for the final Mahdi, or Messiah. So, anyway, the world is in a sense of expectancy
Mm-hmm.
for that. And these people think that it could have something to do with UFOs. That's why Daniken's thing is called Chariots of the Gods, because it goes back to a story in the Bible where Elijah was taken to heaven in a fiery chariot.
And Enoch, too?
Enoch, it says he walked with God, and was no more, or he was with God.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, then another thing we're going to look at was in 1990, I was a minister of the community church in Tehachapi, California, and there was a group of what I call true believers there, and they believed. They had a leader named, I knew her. Her name was Doris Ecker, and they called her Dharma. All of her followers called her Dharma, and Dharma is the Buddhist word for teaching. And they believed that she channeled the words of Hatan, a Pleiadian Starfleet commander.
Okay.
And she wrote in a thing called the Phoenix Journal. Anyway, I was the minister at that time, and everyone was trying to run them out of town, the other churches. And so I gave them sanctuary in our church, the community church. I said, you can come here. We don't agree with you, but you have the right to believe what you want to believe, And so anyway, it went well until all of a sudden she started channeling anti-Semitism.
Oh.
And then I told them at that point they're not welcome. Because one thing we don't tolerate is intolerance. And so and finally I came across, I'll just leave it with this, a Presbyterian minister by the name of Barry H. Downing did a book called The Bible and Flying Saucers. And we'll really have fun with that one.
All right, and are we also going to talk about close encounters, abductions,
Yeah, we're gonna
extraplanetary experiences,
Yeah,
and where does God fit into all of this?
That's exactly what we're gonna do.
Oh my goodness,
So
that's quite a subject matter.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover.
And I think a lot of people would have a lot of questions and a lot of opinions.
Mhm.
And so bring these questions and your opinions to our Spiritwind class. As I've said before, we meet every Wednesday at 5:30 at Unity of Auburn, 1212 High Street. Come, bring your friends, bring your questions. We'll be there to help answer your questions, I hope, right? And I wanted to thank everyone for watching, and I want to thank you again, Rick.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.